Session 2.5, it's called When Marriage is Questioned. The passage is Genesis chapter 2, verses 18 through 25. And here's the main point. Marriage is between one man and one woman for life. Throughout God's work of creation, He created the sun, the moon, the stars, the land, the sea, and every step along the way, He said it's good. And then when God had finished with creation, He stepped back, took a look, and He said it's very good. But as we come to our passage today, we see for the first time that God declares something is not so good. He said it's not good for the man to be alone. Now, isolation, loneliness, being alone is something that is a reality for certain people in our world today. When people misbehave, whether it's a kid disobeying his parents about cleaning up his room, or whether it's criminals violating the law, isolation is often a form of discipline or punishment. Disobedient kid, time out, right in the corner. The criminal, solitary confinement. And that's seen putting them in a place where they don't have interaction with other people. It's the severest form of punishment or discipline in our culture. We were created to live in relationships. We were created to live in community. And this is a reality in our spiritual lives. God calls us to community so that we understand we're not in this thing alone. If we're by ourselves, we tend, as Hebrews chapter 2 says, to drift. But when we live in community, people continuously remind us of the gospel, encourage us, help share in our burdens that we experience, help us when we're on hard times to have provision, experience love of Jesus in real ways through the church. That's really important, but it's not only applicable in the spiritual sense, but in the practical, everyday sense. And when Adam was naming the animals, they were coming by, and he noticed that they all had pairs. But he wondered, why am I alone? Why is there not a mate, a helper that's suitable for me? But he wasn't left in that position. God had the perfect answer. God put Adam to sleep. From his rib created Eve, the perfect helper. And what we see from Scripture is that God designed marriage from the very beginning, that a man and woman would come together in a covenant relationship, and each of them had strengths and each of them had weaknesses, but together they compensated for each other's weaknesses and were complete. They were made whole and they were united in that covenant bond. Ultimately, their love for and faithfulness to one another is a picture of God's relationship, His love, His covenant with the church. Here's the practical application. How can these principles about marriage apply to teenagers? No matter where we are in terms of relationships, the principle is we need to treat each other with honor and dignity and respect. We ultimately need to see our relationships with the opposite sex, even with brothers or sisters. We need to see our relationships with other people as an expression of worship to God. We're called to love people well. And if we live in relationships selfishly, particularly with members of the opposite sex, then that's not honoring God. That's not worshiping God the way that He designed even that marriage relationship. But when we intentionally pursue relationships, even to the point of marriage, for the sake of worshiping God, that's the way that we're most fully fulfilled and satisfied in that relationship. But ultimately, that's the way that God is most fully glorified through our lives.